I'm really pleased and privileged to have the opportunity to talk to you today about post-traumatic stress. When we talk about domestic violence causing psychological harm, we need to think about that harm in two different phases. It's a bit like imagining a house being on fire. We cannot start to rebuild until the fire is out. So if you know that a woman is in danger, then you need to do exactly what you normally do, which is about risk assessment and safety planning. And we need to make sure that she is safe enough before the DVD or what I'm going to say to you is appropriate. We know that domestic violence doesn't just cause physical injury, but psychological harm. And so I'm going to talk to you about post-traumatic stress, about how to identify it, and about how you as workers can support a woman or empower her to heal. I am not talking to you to turn you into clinical psychologists. That would be inappropriate and actually a loss to the domestic violence sector. But we know that lots of women would not want to see a specialist, and it can be difficult for her to access those services. And in that instance, it may be helpful to empower her by some of the things that we're going to talk about today. The start of your conversation with a woman might be to introduce a link between domestic violence and psychological stress. You might talk about other people that you've met rather than acting as if you're raising the topic because it's something to do with her. Normalize it to help that woman not feel alone. You might want to say something very specifically, like, I'm not saying that you're crazy or mental or anything like that. That may have been something that he said to you. But what I know is that domestic violence causes psychological harm. And just as I'd ask if you need medical attention for physical things that have happened or that he did to you, so I want to ask you about your thoughts and feelings. When women are subjected to events like that, they may experience 3 different groups of symptoms. It might be better to call them signs rather than symptoms, so that we're not medicalizing or pathologizing something that is in fact a normal, ordinary reaction to something that is an abnormal or traumatic event. The 3 groups of features or signs are intrusion or flashbacks, by which I mean the woman relives the assault. She's thinking about it all the time. Or it may be that it comes back to her at night time in bad dreams or nightmares. The second feature we would call avoidance. Women call it different things. They say, I blank out, or I switch off, or I just go numb. She's making systematic efforts to try and avoid memories of past assaults or abuse. And the third group of features or characteristics are about arousal or hypervigilance. What women call it is feeling on red alert. They might say, I'm walking on eggshells all the time. Those intrusive events, be they memories or flashbacks, can be triggered by different things. It may be that they're triggered by something that happens outside the woman. For instance, I'm thinking of a woman who heard the keys turning in a lock, and she jumped because she was remembering her husband coming home. That was a signal for her of getting ready for the next assault. You won't always know what the triggers are, but it's a very helpful question to ask. What sets off those memories? At what time of day do they come back? Many women are very good at suppressing them or pushing them away during the day, but when they get into bed at night and it's quiet and they close their eyes, that's the very time when they start to relive it. Help her talk through what those memories are, particularly including her thoughts and her feelings. What you don't want is for her to tell you the story of the memory without her processing any thoughts or feelings. Make sure you're putting in questions like, and as you remember that, how are you feeling? Or what was going through your mind at that time? This is an opportunity for you effectively to be a silent witness to her experience and to break her sense of isolation. Let's talk about avoidance and numbing. How would you recognize that? Well, A woman might behave in ways that show you that she's frightened about something or she's putting off doing something. For instance, a woman doesn't want to go out of the refuge. I'm not talking about part of her safety planning, but I'm talking about things like she doesn't want to go shopping or she doesn't want to leave her room. That would be a sign of avoidance that she might want some help with. Another form of avoidance might be mental. So a woman is saying, I don't want to talk about it, or I don't want to think about it, and is clearly distressed or agitated about that. Or it might be that women behave in ways that would be an indirect indicator that she's avoiding her feelings or her thoughts. For instance, that she's drinking or she's using drugs as a way of being able to get a relief from the emotional pain. Somebody who's avoiding feelings might be one of the best clients that you have in your refuge. She is the one that's keeping up with the cleaning rota. She's vacuuming, she's busy, she's helpful, and she's doing that as a way of distracting herself. The hardest thing for you to catch is when women dissociate or switch off or blank out unconsciously because they themselves may not be aware that they're doing it. So you're sitting talking to a woman and suddenly she goes quiet, or she loses eye contact with you, or she stops moving. She seems to go someplace else. Trust your gut about that, because that is probably a very good sign that she's avoiding her feelings. You might also recognize avoidance because a woman says she feels sort of dead or empty, like she's just going through the motions and she doesn't have fun anymore. That too would be a sign of avoidance or numbing. When we think about hypervigilance or hyperarousal, I want to make very clear that there's a distinction between healthy and appropriate fear. It is absolutely appropriate, normal and healthy that she feels afraid about threats or about the risk of ongoing abuse. What I'm talking about, though, is herself reporting that she is frightened about things unnecessarily. If women experience multiple assaults, effectively, their systems may give up and stay locked on red alert. So you might notice that a woman seems fearful. You might notice that she constantly scans her environment. That would be a sign, perhaps, that it would be useful for her to watch the DVD or to have a look at the handout for her within the guide. It's a great framework, and there's a but. And the but is that simple post-traumatic stress best represents people who are subjected to a one-off single event, like a car accident or an earthquake. But we know that women who are experiencing domestic violence will have many, many times where they're assaulted or abused. We might better conceptualize their experience not as simple post-traumatic stress disorder, but as Judith Herman describes, complex PTSD. And there is a list of those characteristic features of complex PTSD in your guide. From what we've been talking about, are there any questions that you have?
My thinking is that all my clients have suffered trauma through domestic violence, so it would be natural for them to have nightmares. And I'm wondering how to differentiate between just nightmares and when it becomes post-traumatic stress.
It's not your job. You're not under pressure about having to label it as post-traumatic stress disorder. If she has identified that nightmares are a bother, then that's sufficient in its own for you to lift the tip or the strategy from the guide and from the DVD to be able to build on it together.
Some of the women who come into the refuge find it very hard to talk about their feelings, and it can feel quite intrusive to encourage them to do so. Have you got any strategies that would help us to deal with that?
Well, as you say they don't want to talk to you, one thing occurs to me that they may be willing to watch a DVD. So it might be worthwhile saying, well, we have a DVD that will give you some information about how other women feel without pressing them to have a regular conversation with you. The next sections of the DVD are focused on me having conversations with 6 different women. They're designed so that women can recognize perhaps some of the things that they're feeling in each of those women's stories, and for you to have a sense of the techniques or strategies that you can use to empower women that you're working with directly.